So we don't have a schedule officially yet, but we do have some reports, and so can't wait till November.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, women's hockey fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report that lives on the Locked On NHL channel of the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you all of the news you need to know around women's hockey every Saturday. My name is Erica L Ayala. I am your host also of Locked On Kraken and an accredited media member going to Milano Cortina, Rachel, to cover the women's and men's ice hockey tournaments at the 2026 Olympics. Super excited about that. Joined by, of course, my super duper co-host here, Rachel Donner. We covered the 2022 Olympics together, covering women's hockey along with Ann Kimmel. But you, of course, are also the co-host of the Locked On Flyers show and the Locked On NHL Friday show. And we are here to talk, though, about women's hockey. We're going to go over what we know about the schedule that has not officially been released, but we have some intel there. We're also going to have a little bit of a conversation, fair or foul, top players in the PWHL perhaps taking pay cuts to boost the roster, and then just some other PWHL signing news, things of that nature. Want to let you know before we get into our rundown that this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And we have been not so patiently, Rachel, waiting for not at all, like the zero patience for waiting for the schedule. But thankfully, some reporting, some sleuthing has been done by a few different outlets, and we might have some leaks as to when we can expect the season to begin. Rachel, what came out in the last week since our last episode, our deep dive of PWHL Seattle?
Yeah, so there's been several reports out there that the season is looking to start the weekend of November 21st to 23rd, which is a little bit earlier than it did last year, which was at the November 30th, I believe, was the first games.
Indeed. So, it's still deep into November. So a little bit deeper into the hockey season, certainly than NCAA athletes are used to. And, we both are about to cover or are covering rookie portion of training camp, and we'll be covering NHL training camps with our respective Locked On NHL shows here. So I think on the one hand, probably looking to maybe not have too much overlap there. But then also we know this is a jam-packed hockey season across the board because it's an Olympic year. And Marie-Philip Poulin also already put us on notice that Hockey Canada is going for the sweep of the podium, women's, men's, and para gold medal. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done between now and the end of February. And so let's talk about things that we know usually fit into a women's hockey calendar, and that overlap with what we've seen for the PWHL season. This year, that will be the Olympics. There's usually a World Championships, and then we have rivalry series, which sometimes takes place. It is an Olympic year, so that will likely be, or you can, I should say, sometimes there's rivalry series, but then there's almost like rivalry series part 2, maybe more of a victory tour. I think actually they did. USA Hockey called it once a victory tour. So, do we have any reports with regard to some of those kind of tentpole events when it comes to the women's hockey schedule?
Right. And we've talked about rivalry series and the PWHL, and that now that the PWHL exists, is there even a need for the rivalry series anymore as a tune-up? Because ostensibly the PWHL should be a league that's good enough to keep these players going. Now, the rivalry series provides the opportunity for those specific country teams, USA and Canada, to come together and get practice games in. So I do understand it to a certain extent. I think there's arguments pro and con, and some of the potential con here is the interruption of the PWHL season. Whereas you see on the NHL side, it's a very clear, nope, you're with your club team until X date. Then you have a couple of days of practice and getting it together, the Olympics, and then you come back to your club team. And there's a very clear separation, right, on the men's side. But here, we have the rivalry series already scheduled in Cleveland for Thursday, November 6th and Saturday, November 8th. But if you're going to start your PWHL season November 21st, you got to open your training camps. And, the report is that training camps are going to open up November 7th, smack dab in the middle of that first rivalry series. Like, that's tough because a whole bunch of your players are theoretically in those rivalry series games.
100%. It's giving, we're starting the WNBA season in late May, even though we know a lot of the top tier talent in particular from North America is still playing overseas.
Still in Europe, yeah.
Because they're likely playing for championships overseas where they get paid more. Like, that's what it's giving. It's always about figuring out on the women's side how to pack everything in. And, I think of how, again, you and I are hosts of and follow an MNHL team as well as the league. And what we know is that when it comes to this particular season, where NHL players and the NHL Players Association have made an agreement that players are allowed to play for their country, that has also opened up a difference when it comes to staggering, especially positions like goaltenders. Like, I'm thinking about the Seattle Kraken. We know Philipp Grubauer is going to be competing for Team Germany. So getting a third goaltender in the system is less about an opportunity for a young goaltender and more about, okay, when Philipp leaves for Germany, if Joey Decord finds his way on the USA team, do we have someone that can be like a full-time NHLer within that period, so we're not losing any steam? I mean, the Kraken have a lot of other things they need to worry about, but I thought that was interesting, at least in how that team was approaching an Olympic year. But we talked about it even a little bit on the last episode with Ava, right? Has this league outgrown, as Kendall Coyne-Schofield told us on the show before, the usage right now of kind of practice players? Is there a way to open up the roster, maybe only for Olympic years, or when there are these international breaks, even to give these teams a little more reprieve? I think that would be an interesting conversation, and we'll see how the PWHL, navigates that in the future.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it changes the nature of training camp for the PWHL. If these top players are away for the beginning part of it, how are you doing player evaluations of your borderline players, your new draft picks, to try to determine those practice players versus full-time players that with the remaining contracts that you have to sign when they're not going up against the top competition right away? And then you have new teams. There's been so much upheaval this season because of expansion. You're looking at training camps as a time to build team cohesiveness. When you lose even 3 or 4 days of a 2-week period, like, that's difficult for all of these teams. Now, are they all on the same playing field, so to speak, with this issue? Yes. So in some ways, it's divided across the board, but then you also look at Seattle and Vancouver as expansion teams, which is all new players like hodgepodgey coming together. Are they at a disadvantage here? Could be.
Right, because they have both built their team around internationals. I mean, we literally spent the last several weeks talking about this, right? And how stacked these teams are. And it's like, yeah, you're stacked, and, you're not going to have the integration of some of your players when it comes to the first week of training camp. And training camps in hockey are not really that long. I mean, especially comparative, right? We're in the NFL season right now. I mean, they seem like the preseason sometimes feels longer than the season at times. But, I think it's going to be really interesting how they navigate that. We also don't know about world championships and if and how that will play a factor factor this year. So a lot of variables, not to mention that we've talked about this before, Rachel. Are we going to see takeover tour games? Are there going to be specialty games? We haven't. I remember asking the
No
league
idea.
ahead of its six month runway, a full on sprint to get the league started on January 1. Are they thinking of winter classics or all-star games, or are they content to just be on the slate when it comes to the National Hockey League? I don't think it necessarily has to be one or the other. And as the league continues to grow, I would think that they want to brand, kind of these tentpole events in their league, as opposed to always tapping into other things, whether it's on the international stage or with men's hockey.
Right. And again, I understand that it's a difficult process to build a schedule. And, with some of these teams sharing a building with NHL teams and NBA teams and all of this other stuff and the concerts, it's sometimes difficult. But I think we're running out of runway here in terms of people being able to plan and for these takeover tour cities, especially if that exists, to be able to market them and get the excitement up appropriately, especially, it's mid-September. If you're trying to put together an event for December, it sounds far off, but it's really not.
No, not at all. Absolutely not at all. And then how does that impact things like a playoff schedule? Because the playoffs, in theory, right, Rachel, could change, or they might not change at all, but we don't know as of now. And so that's something else that has to be considered. I mean, I don't know, is the more prudent thing this year to rock with your format, just knowing that maybe it's a time crunch? We've already heard players like Hillary Knight, who of course will be with PWHL Seattle this coming season, but a lot of Boston media asked the fleet about if and how the international schedule and some of the injuries, thinking Aaron Frankel there, impacted them being in good stride towards the end of their season. I mean, these are already conversations, and Boston, they were in a situation where they had just lost and they were not going to advance. And so maybe a little bit of rough edges around that particular subject. But I think even if you remove some of the frustration and emotion right after a loss, it is an interesting conversation. How does all of this fit, and how are we keeping the recovery time something that is manageable to keep these athletes in tip-top shape? Because now they're managing their schedules internationally, but also in the domestic league. We know that travel, as we talked about with Ava, right, is going to be different now that there are two teams on the
Out
Pacific,
west, yeah.
exactly, in the Pacific time zone. And so those are all things, again, conversations that we're seeing happen right now in the WNBA. And if there is no lockout, they'll be in season 30 next year, Rachel. So these are things that need to be refined. The NWSL had a huge fallout in the news cycle with regard to when, and as in what time of day they're playing these games in the mid-summer in places like Houston and Orlando, where it's super hot.
Right. Now, obviously, indoor arena sports like hockey, less of a problem. I mean, the ice sometimes gets wonky, the further it gets toward the summer, depending on where you are. But, that's less of an issue. But the issue does come with timing. I think it was horrible timing last year with Women's Worlds and coming back to 1 or 2 games per team and having to regroup as PWHL teams and with playoff spots on the line. And again, we don't know the playoff format this upcoming season with 8 teams yet either. So, there's so many questions related to the schedule and how all of this is going to play out with the international component factored in.
100%. And again, these are questions that are going to need to be answered. We understand and can offer grace that this is going into season 3. These are also, though, just questions that continue to arise when it comes to women's sports leagues and how they grow, how they expand to fit and meet the market, while also not sacrificing too much and not putting too much wear and tear on the athletes themselves. And so, yes, the example, hockey being an indoor sport, but that's just an example. NWSL and their broadcast windows impacts when they play games, and athletes want to see those games later in the day rather than at high noon. So anyway, all things to consider. We will hopefully get more answers as we march closer to those training camp dates, or what we believe is the training camp window ahead of the unofficial start of the season. Hopefully we'll get that announcement soon, and including what the playoff picture will look like. But coming up next, Rachel, we're going to switch gears a little bit, go into a hypothetical debate here, fair or foul. Top players like, I don't know, a Marie-Philip Poulin, should they have to, or should they entertain taking salary cuts? What are the pros and cons of that? And then we'll wrap up with some news across the league.
Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. When you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that is why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. It's built for people with busy lives. And if you put off organizing those finances, Monarch is for you. It does all the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes. You see clear data visuals, you get smart categorization of your spending, and you finally feel in control of your money. You don't even have to touch a spreadsheet. It helps you notice inefficient investment allocations. You can discover those forgotten 401ks from old jobs. You can save even more money that you can then turn around and reinvest. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL.
Welcome back to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report, living on the Locked On NHL channel. So you can find us on YouTube under Locked On NHL. You can find us on any of your audio platforms where you can listen to podcasts under the Locked On NHL channel. But look for the purple icon and the Women's Hockey Report, where you can find all of our content about women's sports. Erica L Ayala here alongside Rachel Donner. Thank you for making us your first listen of Saturday. Rachel, we talked about the schedule, what we know, what we don't know, and why we are impatiently awaiting all of the details. But now let's have a hypothetical conversation, because there had been some reporting that the icon herself, Marie-Philip Poulin, who plays for the Montreal Victoire, also, of course, with Hockey Canada, we've already mentioned what she wants to see come February for the Hockey Canada podiums. But reports that maybe MPP was willing to take a pay cut. And we've seen this happen across sports. We see it all of the time. Usually it's done in good faith with a franchise and a star player, so that they can maybe bring in another asset or even two to boost the roster. And, let's talk about what we know as far as what reporting is out there, and then have a conversation. Should this be something that, again, an icon, she is an icon, she is of the moment, she is all of the things, MPP, should she?
MVP.
Yeah, MVP. I see what you did there. Should she do? Is this something that a top player should even entertain?
So I want to make a distinction here, because there are players that take a hometown discount when they extend contracts or sign contracts, right? Or, whether it's their hometown or not, right? But, there's some people on the men's side of things. Let's say they've always dreamed their entire lives and they wore pajamas that said, I want to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs, John Tavares. And then you do, right? Right. And so you maybe take a little less money because this is your lifelong dream. That is not what this situation being reported here is. This is actually restructuring an existing contract to take a pay cut from your existing contract. right? Not a new contract, an existing contract. Now, this is part, in theory, of a contract extension. So she's taking a pay cut for the remaining year of her contract and then extending it out. That'll get the salary, back up to where it was, or even more down the road. There hasn't been an official announcement about this. This has all been reported, and I am reading it from a French language newspaper or outlet. So there's some translation issues here for sure. But I think that is the distinction that gives me a lot of pause, because she already had the contract in place. And I can see somebody floating the argument out there, well, Laura Stacey plays on Montreal. They have a combined income from
Oh, dear.
We do not do that. We do not play that game.
No. They're two different athletes. Yeah. Yep. And so, again, like you said, this is Le Journal de Montreal. Poulin, apparently, again, as you said, a contract restructure. When translated into English, it says that Poulin and perhaps other players as well are being asked to restructure their offers because the team, the Victoire, is having difficulty staying in below the salary cap. And the phrase used again in the translation, less today, more tomorrow. And that goes to what you were saying, that this is an extension. And so maybe you take from the first year and you extend that beyond. I mean, it's a slippery slope for so many reasons. As I have already mentioned in the article, they talk about some NHL players that have done this. I remember also in the WNBA, just to use a women's example, Swin Cash notably was waived for a few days from the New York Liberty so that she effectively came off of the books for a little bit and then did restructure. We've seen, you talked about hometown discounts. There had been reports that Brianna Stewart did not max out. She absolutely is worth the veteran max, and that she, took a little bit less. She also does year-to-year contracts, maybe because of some of this. And, in order to build a roster that can compete.
Right.
But,
for future years, not the existing year.
Right. Exactly. And so this is a slippery slope. I honestly think for an athlete in any league, because you're acting in good faith. I think what ownership would probably say is, well, if we didn't have these salary cap restrictions, or in the case of the WNBA, sometimes teams, they have the salary, but they're beholden to only 12 spots. And again, we've talked about that and how many roster spots there are comparative to salary. I think there's so many things here. And then you have the MLB where it's like, yeah, okay, we want you to stay under this number, but like, if you're a gazillionaire, just pay a fine and do what you want. So, and there are, last time I read the CBA, there are some, stipulations as far as if you go over the cap, like how many days or how many hours do you have to then come underneath that after making some different transactions. So, there's always a grace period, things of that nature, but we're not at MLB level where owners, well, there's only the one. So, there's that, so even, right, there's only the one owner. So, how do you decide who your favorite child is and go over on that salary cap, but not the others? That's not really a thing for the PWHL, at least as it's structured now, which again opens up other questions, right? Is that how it should be? But also, we just really don't have precedent in women's sports for teams being able to go over the cap in any way, shape, or form. And you have to operate within the CBA very rigidly, because, no one wants women to have a competitive advantage.
Right. Well, and it's all like relative, like with the scale that you're looking at. So the salary cap for this upcoming season in the PWHL is $1.34 million per team. Minimum salaries at just over $37,000 a year. Average salaries to make a team cap compliant is $58,350 thereabouts. And so when you look at players like there's only, as of the last news related to a signing we got that affected this, like 9 players that make a 6-figure salary or higher. Emily Clark is the highest paid player in the game. It is not even MVP. And this, like, for her to not be in that conversation is wild to me. And then for her to take a pay cut, like, it does send a really interesting precedent that even if the salary cap gradually increases and these salaries go up, we always talk on the men's side of things about percent of salary cap, like what percent of the allocation is a player getting and how much is that player worth. Like, Marie-Philip Poulin is worth, I would say, 12 to 13% of her team's salary cap minimum.
Yeah, I mean, again, so many different ways to take this conversation. I will say that I think these are conversations that need to be had, because I feel like for too long, women's hockey for sure, but other women's sports, it was like, we don't talk about the numbers, we don't disclose the numbers. I mean, it took, there were the dark years and the dark ages of women's sports where you wouldn't even post simple things like attendance or viewership, because there was a fear that the numbers were quote unquote too low. Well, the numbers are the numbers, babes. That is what it is. And there's empowerment, especially towards the athletes, where if they understand what the kind of the economic system is here, and we do know, we've talked about this on the show before, players do have access to salaries internal. Those things are not supposed to be made public, although again, we've been talking about reported salaries here and there. But I think these are good conversations to have. And so we'll see another conversation here, Rachel, as we march closer to season number 3, where we kind of have to put a pin in it and see how things fare. But I think if you want to talk about the X's and O's here for a minute, I think this does signal for some people, right, that this is a Montreal team that is willing to find a way to get over the hump. I think they were tired of losing in overtime just to then not reach an opportunity to play for the Walter Cup. So definitely going to keep a keen eye on that as well. Indeed, we will. But coming up, we have just a few news stories that we're going to talk about before we wrap today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your first $5 bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets that you can use across the app or on the platform. And some people love going to FanDuel because you can do player props. Some people like the same game parlays. You can even jump in as the live action unfolds. I talk a lot about futures bets when I'm talking about FanDuel. But the great thing about FanDuel, the app, or FanDuel.com, is that you can do it all. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Everything is quick, it's easy, and it's the best way to add more energy to your Sundays. Not to mention, just to keep an eye, perhaps, on your fantasy squad. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, women's hockey fans, we are going to wrap with some news. And wee woo. Is that the hootie hoo of Unrivaled Hootie Hoo? That's
yeah. For the Alice, yeah.
Yeah, hootie hoo. We've got 2 new Unrivaled teams. That's gonna be fun. Talk about valuations and money on the rise. Unrivaled's got it going on. PWHL might need to figure that one out too. But anyway, the New York Sirens have made not one, but 2 different transaction announcements since we did our deep dive, Rachel.
Yeah, so really good to see some of the draft picks getting signed here. Kristyna Kaltounkova got a 3-year deal. She's definitely expected to be on the top line on that rebuilding team, I would say. And, it was, I would say, a little bit of a surprise pick going first overall. Definitely a first rounder for sure.
Mhm.
But, she has the benefit of being a player for Team Czechia with a lot of international experience with the NCAA experience of her career at Colgate. And so I think, like, obviously we talked about her when we did the Siren Show breakdown, but she's going to be a huge factor in what this rebuild is looking like with the New York Sirens. And it's good to get ink to paper on that front.
Oh, absolutely. And we know it's not just the Sirens that have some work to do when it comes to their draft picks, but locking up your first pick is always good. And as you mentioned, we've already debated on our deep dives. If you've missed those, we did a deep dive on all 8 teams, yes, including PWHL Vancouver and PWHL Seattle. And so we talked about the impact of the different signings that had been announced to date when we recorded, but also who we were waiting on. And there are some teams that we're still waiting on some pretty significant signings. Most of them are draft picks, but we're still waiting to see how they're going to flush out their roster, or at least their training camp invites, now that we know when training camp will be. And I think that's also interesting. If you're a training camp invite that also has international duties, maybe you're thinking of coming to the PWHL, that's another little wrinkle that the league might have to consider moving forward. But again, not the only signing, the Colgate star who will be reunited with a familiar face in her coach. But the Sirens also announced another signing, Rachel.
Yeah, we don't have the signing yet for Casey O'Brien, which was the other first round pick that the New York Sirens made. But we do have their second round pick signed in Ann Cherkowski, a winger. And, that is good to see. So 2 of their top 3 picks officially signing with the team. Again, really important for cohesiveness. And we talk about this in hockey and in sports all the time. Like, if you're going into camp without people signed, that's always a problem. Now we have until November, so there's a lot more time than we do on the men's side of things. But big star at Clarkson, Ann Cherkowski, and I'm very excited to see what she does with the Sirens.
Indeed. And a little, another bit o' news, if you will. I want to talk about World Championships, and we know where the next host city will be going into 2027. And it's a city that we talked about with respect to the PWHL. They might have been kind of big mad that they didn't get an expansion team, but they will be getting World Championships, the one and only Quebec City.
Yeah, and they're going to get a World Juniors as well. I think there's been a lot of like consolation prizes in some ways thrown Quebec City's way, but they keep trying, and God bless them for doing it. But yeah, so obviously we have the Olympics coming up this year in Milan, but the World Championships as the premier women's hockey championship tournament that takes place in non-Olympic years. This is going to be a huge tournament in Quebec City.
Yeah, so I am sure that all of Quebec City, just like we saw for the announcements for expansion on the PWHL side of things, are going to be super excited and very active in the reporting of everything going down there. Very, very proud Quebec City residents and reporters, which we love to see. We love to see the energy, the vibes, and like you said, some might say consolation prize, but is it also maybe just more data points that Amy Shearer and company can use to perhaps justify an expansion to Quebec City? I guess we'll find out. But that is our show for this week. We are marching ever closer to hockey season in earnest. We're going to start with the boys. The boys hockey is underway, as Rachel and I, again, both are reporting for our respective camps, but that doesn't mean that we will not be keeping you up to date with all of the news coming from women's hockey. It's an Olympic year. We have to figure out what's happening with World Championships. I think it's going to be another banger of an NCAA season. season, and we will have all of that and more covered here for you at the Women's Hockey Report. But Rachel, before we hop out of here, let folks know where they can follow you on the interwebs if they dare.
I am mostly on Blue Sky at R Miriam. That's RMIRIAM. Also on Instagram, R Miriam 12.
All right, there you go. Keeping it mostly consistent. Respect there. If you can get the handles, you might as well, right? And I have here that you can follow me and Rachel on the Women's Hockey Report on TikTok. That is the one channel that we have that is dedicated solely to this show. So some people love getting all of their hockey content in one place, and so Locked On NHL is a great place for you right now. But if you want it a little less congested, then head over to women's_hockey_report on the TikTok. You can follow me personally on TikTok, Erica L Ayala. Also, you can look up Black Rosie Media. It's all me. And I also am on Black Rosie Media on IG, Blue Sky, and of course on YouTube, where you can find the Women's Hockey Report and some of our extra and bonus material on our individual accounts, like singing Pink Pony Club at the Raleigh Takeover Tour. That was a fun time. I feel like we were early adapters, right? Or early-ish adapters, because now Pink Pony Club has been, commandeered by the Minnesota Lynx, which, they are ready to go. I know you're ready to go see some chaperone.
Listen, a week from today, guess where I will be?
Let's go. Rocking out. I love it. Well, that will do for our show. Every Saturday morning, a new episode of the Women's Hockey Report. We do want to continue to grow this community. We had people like Ava on, we've had athletes on, and we want to continue to grow the show. So if you have any recommendations, let us know in the comments, in the chats, leave a review, subscribe, all of the things, and we will catch you on the next Saturday episode. Enjoy your weekend, enjoy the hockey as it slowly returns, and Rachel and I will see you next week. Peace out, everybody.